Okay, we're in. We were talking. That's a Beatles song, isn't it? Within You, Without You. Okay, you're not into the Beatles, fine. All right, just to recap from the other day. Day 2, week 4, right? All right. Faster response, smaller file. Good. All right. We ended with characteristics of traditional diets. So that's where we ended. And so the next one was basically looking at, for example, whether you're vegan or not. In many traditional diets, there are some animal products that are eaten raw. If you hunt and if you basically can source your animal products directly yourself, and if you can be sure that the environment that they have grown up in is pure. For example, there's a whole thing about prion-based diseases. Familiar with prions?
I don't know what that means.
Okay. Well, if you remember in the previous slide, we were talking about infectious diseases, right? So in reality, human beings, we're like everything else. We're basically an entire galaxy in terms of living creatures ourselves. And in fact, our bacteria basically outweigh and outpopulate ourselves within, the average human. Okay? There's like a cloud of bacteria around you. Don't trip out. It's just, we're an ecosystem, each one of us, right? So usually what we're dealing with besides our cells are bacteria, which are basically, I'm an art major, I'm a psych major, not an art major. So bacterium is basically a separate biological entity, has its own DNA, reproduces asexually or sexually, right? So each critter can divide on its own or reproduce with other critters depending on what it is. And there's lots of them, right? Lots of them. There's bacteria, there's viruses. So viruses basically they're essentially DNA inside of a protein coat, and they infect live cells. Right? So as an example, herpes viruses. There are 13 different kinds of herpes viruses that infect humans: cold sores, chicken pox, measles, etc. Right? So all humans, you have cold sore, right. There are certain viruses that are endemic, right? Now, there's other things that are infectious agents. So usually all these things live in a balance with us. So there's good bacteria. There might even be good viruses for us, because the longer a virus is within your particular body, the virus's goal is to replicate. And in order to replicate, it can't be toxic to the host. So one of the things that we found in the ecology of viruses is that things that kill humans are probably relatively new to humans, right? Like in traditional cultures, traditional populations, they aren't necessarily killed off by common cold. But when the common cold was introduced to like Hawaii and certain Native Americans, it wiped them out. So imagine dying from the common cold. You wish you would die, but colds and flu viruses are close cousins, but usually you're not dying from flu. But again, like the pandemic of 1918, where planet-wide there was a flu bug that was hemorrhagic, meaning you bled out from it. Right? That's still out there somewhere. That's why all this attention is paid to flu viruses in flu seasons because we don't know where that came from. We don't know where it came back. Reason I'm going off on this. Food, nutrition, the way you think all contribute to the strength of your immune system as well as exposure. And certain drug things like, definitely alcohol is pretty nasty for your immune system. Pot is a little immunosuppressive. Definitely, the harder drugs, the ones that are toxic, meth, coke, etc., are fairly immunotoxic, and those things show up. Prions. So, prions are basically proteins. So they're below these biological entities, proteins that replicate wildly on their own. And the ones that we're familiar with, basically like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, mad cow, kuru, seem to occur when mammals eat other mammals, like the same species, and it's infected. So there have been some hunters in Oregon who've killed deer who had a particular type of prion disease, and because you're, using the brains to tan the hide, and some of that might get in the meat or whatever, and you suddenly get infected with this prion disease for which there's no cure. The whole mad cow disease, if you remember that, basically came from feeding cows that were infected to other cows, and of course, you can't kill prions with heat. Cooking doesn't kill them. There's no antibiotic because they're not a cell. They're a protein. All of that stuff is unaffected. The only way you can stop it is by burning the corpse up altogether, destroying the prions. Totally, right? So 3 different kinds of disease. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is basically a prion disease. Mad cow, kuru, which basically comes from certain types of cannibalism where you eat infected brains of humans, when you're eating humans. So fairly confined, but again, just an example of that. So I mentioned that because it's rare, but it has happened here in Oregon and other places where people go and kill their own, wild meat supply without necessarily checking to see whether the deer was healthy or not. Because sometimes at certain stages of the disease, you can't detect that the thing was sick. So, might seem off the wall, but there are people that, there's a big hunting culture here, right? So.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
I'm sorry to bother, but we're having trouble hearing you.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like you're way, way out there. We've tried our volumes and everything.
Okay. Crew, you got that? Audio to Cottage Grove? Signal getting out there, the audio? Thank you for letting us know. They are working on it. What do you think?
She's not hearing you in Cottage Grove?
Yeah, she's here, saying, yeah, it must be distant.
Microphone off.
Yeah, turn your microphone off.
And she can hear us okay?
Can you hear us okay now? Well,
now you're muted.
Well, it's better, but it's still, I know, when you're over there, it's really hard to hear you when you're by the board.
Okay, so we must be just picking up with PZMs.
Well,
But
yeah.
there should be through this mic too, right? Theoretically. No?
No, it's that mic right there.
Oh,
That's
okay,
it.
so they're not getting this signal at all?
No.
Okay, my bad, didn't know
Yeah,
that.
they could turn their volume up.
Okay,
That's the only adjustment.
it's all the way up.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, turn your mic off so you don't get feedback, because that echo thing. Yeah, thanks.
Sorry
All
about
right.
that.
That's all right. Didn't know that. Live and learn. Okay. I'll stick close to this.
On the ground over here. Nope.
All right. All right, so the second piece, some animal products eaten raw. Primitive and traditional diets have high food enzyme content from raw dairy products, raw meat and fish, raw honey, tropical fruits, cold-pressed oils, wine and unpasteurized beer, naturally preserved, lacto-fermented vegetables like sauerkraut and things like that, fruits, beverages, meats, and condiments. So as an example, what you want to be able to do is enzyme action, which is what you need to carry on life, stops at about 160 degrees, which is usually what happens with pasteurization. So they're trying to kill bacteria at that point. So what he's suggesting here is basically using products like honey, et cetera, that hasn't been heated if you can produce it yourself or can pay attention to that kind of stuff. Seeds and grains, soaked and sprouted or fermented, so they obviously haven't been heated enough to stop that process. When they start growing, they start producing nutrients that are not necessarily present in the roasting process. Total fat content of traditional diets varies from 30 to 80%, but only about 4% of calories come from polyunsaturated oils, naturally occurring in grains, nuts, fish, things like that. Balance of fat calories is in the form of saturated and monosaturated fatty acids. So basically, often our cold-pressed oils and things like that fit this definition. And traditional diets contain nearly equal amounts of omega-6s and 3s, essential fatty acids, which if you've noticed the whole trend around omega-3s, they're starting to put them in as supplements and advertise whether they've got this content or not, which means it's almost always a supplement because of how we produce our food. So all traditional diets contain some salt, but usually at the level below which we Westerners, particularly Americans, are used to eating. Because salt, if you've noticed, if you did your food mood diary and you did the analysis, and if you understand on the label, the ingredients appear in their frequency. So sometimes if you have salt in the first 5 ingredients, it's significant. So when you read the label, and basically salt is always sodium, right? And how many milligrams of sodium and how many milligrams are in a teaspoon or tablespoon. Well, you wouldn't want a tablespoon of salt. That's a lot, right? But so basically, depending on the salt that's already within the plant or the animal, and a little to taste, if that. Traditional cultures consume animal bones, usually in the form of gelatin-rich bone broth, so using it as soup stock. I've seen this at my house, or at least my parents' house, where Dad cooks a New Orleans-style gumbo. Don't even ask me why he's using chicken feet in a seafood gumbo, but he's doing it the way Grandma taught him to do it. And, so the vegetarians don't like that, but they're not eating the shrimp and all the other, and the crab and all the other stuff that's in the gumbo. So anyway, soup stock, using bones. Traditional cultures make provisions for the health of future generations by providing special nutrient-rich food for parents-to-be, pregnant women, and growing children, proper spacing of children, and teaching the principles of right diet to the young. So, for example, what comes to mind when I see this is there is a certain tradition among certain Native Americans about whenever you bring in a kill, then you let elders, pregnant women, and young children eat the fat, because there's lots of nutrients within the fat before you let them eat before the warriors or even the hunter who brought in the kill eats. So that's an example of such a practice. So eat whole natural foods. Eat only foods that will spoil, but eat them before they do. That means no Twinkies, cupcakes, which have shelf life of longer than a human life. Eat naturally raised meat, including fish, seafood, poultry, beef, lamb, game, organ meats, and eggs. So naturally raised meat. So a lot of companies have been tricking us by saying certain things are natural. I generally don't eat beef, and I try and avoid much of the American meat supply, but in particular beef, for the reasons I talked about with prion-based diseases. I would follow the Reagan standard. Ronald Reagan, while he was alive, had a herd of cattle that were naturally raised, no mad cow, no nothing, organic feed, all that kind of stuff. Hand-fed practically. So follow that standard. You know, when they talk about like Rocky, the free-range chicken, yes, you want chickens that are actually getting exercise outside in natural light, more or less antibiotic free. Same thing with the other sources of meat. If you go to this website, you know, the Weston A. Price Foundation, they actually fanatically go into talking about you need to pay attention to when the grass that the cows that are making the milk that becomes your butter, when did they eat that? And they're saying that there's a 6-month lag. So you want to eat butter and milk products that came from spring-fed cattle, which means you're not getting that until like the fall or summer at best, being a 3-month lag or whatever. Eat whole naturally produced milk products from pasture-fed cows, preferably raw and or fermented, such as whole yogurt, cultures, whole cheeses, and fresh and sour cream. If you can get fresh cream, which there are very few places. I mean, I remember growing up when milk was delivered to your house, you could actually get separated milk where the cream rose to the top. And you actually had to shake the bottle to mix the cream. And so those days are gone, not necessary forever, but so traditional fats and oils using butter and other animal fats, extra virgin olive oil, sesame and flax oil, tropical oils like coconut and palm oil. Fresh fruits and vegetables, preferably organic, in salads and soups or lightly steamed, preserving the nutrients. Whole grains and nuts that have been prepared by soaking to neutralize phytic acid and other anti-nutrients. So an anti-nutrient is a natural constituent of the plant that is neutralized as the plant starts sprouting. Remember what I said about allelochemicals in plants? Like peppers, for example. Okay, so some plants, as a part of their defense system against mammals, will create toxins to encourage some things to eat them and other things not to. So these can be neutralized from sprouting. So include enzyme-enhanced lacto-fermented vegetables, fruits, beverages, condiments in your diet on a regular basis. Things like sauerkraut, among other things, as an example. Prepare homemade meat stocks from the bones of chicken, beef, lamb, and fish. Use liberally in soups and sauces, so you can actually get soup bones and things like that from butchers and other markets that prepare those kind of things, if you're so inclined. Herb teas and coffee substitutes in moderation. Actually, he basically is avoid coffee. Use filtered water for cooking and drinking. Use unrefined Celtic sea salt and a variety of herbs and spices for food interest and appetite stimulation. This is also in moderation. The whole salt piece and sugar piece. Make your own salad dressings using raw vinegar, virgin olive oil, and expeller expressed flax. Natural sweeteners such as raw honey. This is obviously if you're not diabetic. Maple syrup, dehydrated cane sugar juice, and stevia. Unpasteurized wine or beer in strict moderation with meals. Now, you know what moderation means. Cook only in stainless steel, cast iron, glass, or good quality enamel. Not aluminum. Natural supplements. Get plenty of sleep, exercise, and natural light. Think positive thoughts and minimize stress. Practice forgiveness. Now, this is actually from the website, so I thought it actually deserves some amplification. Break it down, make it plain, as Malcolm would say. So get plenty of sleep, exercise, natural light, and FaceTime with human beings or in the presence of living systems like nature, like rivers, like oceans, like forests. Okay? What I was going to include, and this is kind of what I forgot when I was like hitting my forehead. Oh yeah, I forgot to include this in the slides. I've put up in Moodle a Word file that contains a bunch of links to NPR, and I think there might be one in the New York Times, but the NPRs are audio files of interviews that appeared over the weekend where they were doing a special on addiction. So there's a comedian who basically talks about his alcoholism and his food addiction. There's a whole 15-minute segment on internet addiction from a treatment program of these guys who basically had suffered from internet addiction, mostly gaming and other things like that. And I think there's another piece about women and alcoholism. There's another piece about addiction in general, which I thought was, interesting supplemental hearing or listening. You can write an extra credit reaction paper if it strikes your fancy. But I thought I would include it because it's an interesting conversation, because I remember when we were first talking about internet addiction in the 90s, it was kind of like, as the person talked about, kind of like the trickle before the flood, and now is the flood. So part of the treatment program of the folks that were in treatment for their internet addiction was not only talking about, okay, what does addiction mean when you're online? What does addiction mean in a online connected world? How do you tell the difference between what's healthy and what's not? Well, yeah, if you spend 40 hours on a computer straight, that's the problem. Okay, if you're spending more than 8 hours a day and you're not being paid for that, probably a problem, among other things. So then how do you cure yourself? Besides, going to a treatment program that only has 7 beds in Seattle. And there's probably others, right? So one of the things they talked about is setting boundaries and doing 3 things. Getting plenty of sleep, because you don't get sleep in an internet addiction. Exercise, because you're not exercising, you're not moving in the environment. Get out of the house, i.e. the natural light. What they added was FaceTime with human beings that you love and are supportive. Instead of texting, talk. Not just on the phone, like face to face. Get out in a living system that's bigger than you, like a forest, like a river, like the ocean. It's one of the few things that I like about Oregon is that compared to LA, it's like living in a national park. Half an hour from any city, you can be in almost total wilderness. So that has some beneficial health effects, being out in that kind of thing. So when they talk about thinking positive thoughts and minimizing stress, I'd say also take time, quiet time for yourself for reflection, meditation, or creativity. Practice forgiveness is what they talked about, and I start with forgiving yourself, and I want to amplify that, what that was about, because there's a theme that came up in your food mood diaries like regularly when you were able to recognize certain binge patterns for certain your favorite comfort foods, and psychologically beating yourself up for that, especially like when you get into a binge situation and you can't control it, or you feel like you can't control it. So you blame yourself and then you eat more, etc., which is, for example, what the guy on the link about being alcoholic and a food addict, as a comedian, that's what he was talking about. Yeah, if I felt bad, if I felt depressed, I'd order out Chinese, get two portions of cake, plus a sweet. And I feel bad about it, then recycle, the other day. So, all over again. So, forgiveness is not forgetting. It is letting go of your attachment to your anger. Also your self-anger, the anger directed at yourself, anger towards others, also including guilt or shame. So guilt and shame both have an anger component where some of the anger is aimed back at you, or you feel some shame because of feeling anger towards another person or a situation. So it becomes kind of a complex thing, and obviously on a food website, they're not going to talk about, they might talk about practicing forgiveness, but what they're seeing is the connection between emotions and people's food trips. Okay? So you want to forgive yourself, especially when you fail to reach a goal that you've set for yourself. All right, so come on. Thank you. All right, so sometimes failure to reach a goal is the difficulty in facing the fear of change, not weakness. Not necessarily weakness. But even if you were going to go with a weakness route, if you think it is a weakness, then work on it as if it were a set of weights. I mean, we do weight training. Oh, I want to get my ripped abs from high school back, or I want to work on my biceps or triceps or my quads or whatever. Set of weights. I'm just using that as an analogy. Use your anger as a determination to strengthen your weaknesses, the things that you need to work on. Change your anger into determination, generally through action. And that's part of a forgiveness process. So in the following, I'm, for example, going to use an Aramaic tradition because you're familiar with the European English version, rather than the original language version, in which there are detailed instructions, more detailed instructions in the Aramaic version. So when you talk about forgiveness, it's often used, especially within English, within a spiritual religious context, which I'm not really endorsing one religion, but I'm introducing a focus for forgiveness. So if you're not Muslim, Buddhist, or Hindu, which there are similar forgiveness technologies, which I can talk about, but not prepared to talk about today because this is food and forgiveness, right? But I'm sure because we're English speaking, some of you have some exposure to a Christian framework, at least from name familiarity, whether you're Christian or not. Probably haven't heard this piece. Today, come on. Do I need to forgive my computer? Or switch back to my Macintosh? Could be a battery problem. All right. Prayers of the Cosmos is a book by Neil Douglas Klotz, which is the language that Yeshua spoke, or Isho. And you know him by his Greek name, Jesus. His language he spoke was Aramaic, which is a sister language to Arabic, Hebrew, and Amharic. And the oldest book in the world, according to the Register Guard, and of course I believe everything I read in the Register Guard, is an Aramaic Bible from Egypt, 450 AD. Now, if you know your English or Christian history, the King James Version was written in 1600 AD. So I trust you can do the math and figure out that the Peshitta in Aramaic at 450 AD is older, closer to the origins. So, Buun de Washmaya. So, within Aramaic, there's multiple translations because the language itself was actually designed to do that. So this is the literal translation. Abun literally means birther in Aramaic. So it's talking about a sacred feminine. Birther, father, mother of the cosmos, you create all that moves in light. Nefkadash Shemak. Focus your light within us. Make it useful as the rays of a beacon show the way. So prayers of the cosmos, most of the book is basically taken up with what you refer to in English as the Lord's Prayer, plus the Beatitudes, plus phrases like love your enemy, basically translated from Aramaic and given multiple meanings within that. So 3 levels of Aramaic, and this is the literal version being shown here. Focus your light within us, make it useful as the rays of the beacon show the way. Create your reign of unity now through our fiery hearts and willing hands. Your one desire that acts with ours, as in all light, so in all forms. Grant what we need each day in bread and insight, subsistence for the call of growing life. Now, the reason I started focusing on this is I realized, in Aramaic, bread is not just food. It's food for thought. Literally, they're talking about food for thought. Grant what we need in bread and insight together. Not just feeding our bellies, but feeding our minds. Clear reference to that. So I figured, okay, we're talking about food and its mood and what will be optimal. Okay, well, I don't know of I know of other ways of referring to it, but let's just start with the Christian framework because they're probably going to be used to that one. I'm not trying to do a comparative religion, but again, we'll be talking about addictive behaviors within spirituality in the coming weeks. So I figured let's start with a model that you're not familiar with, because like many of us, I certainly have had my negative experience with organized corporate religion. But no organized corporate religion I've seen talked about this. So, daily bread. Loose the cords of mistakes binding us as we release the strands we hold of others' guilt. So this is the line in KJV which says, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And this is the literal line. Don't let surface things delude us, but free us from what holds us back from our true purpose. From you is born all ruling will, the power and life to do, the song that beautifies all, from age to age it renews. Truly, power to these statements, may they be the ground from which all my actions grow, sealed in trust and faith. Amen. All right, so the following is a full translation of one line. So there's 3 layers of Aramaic: literal, relational, and metaphorical. So literal is, okay, just straight the way it is. Birther, you create all that moves in light. Abun literally means birther, not our father. So I'm not sure, biology has changed in 2,000 years. I'm not sure where you get our father from birther, because I don't know of any fathers that birth anything. So, where is that at? So, one line literal, then relational, that is There's wordplay. So there's another suggested meaning in between the interplay between the words, if you know that. Then metaphorical. There's another meaning, for example, the parable of the sower, where in the sower, the word is like seeds. If it falls on fertile ground, it sprouts immediately. If it falls on rocky ground, then it gets lost in the clefts. If you scatter it before birds, the birds eat it and fly away. And so it's not literally birds, it's the mind jumping from one place to another, not focused. So the metaphor, the sower, basically agriculture. Follow me, I will make you fishers of men, right? Throw out that line, do you catch anything? Is the fish hooked? So, this is the line about, in KJV, translated as, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. So the literal line means, loose the cords of mistakes binding us as we release the strands we hold of others' guilt. So in terms of forgiveness, it's talking about a level of forgiveness in which you're hung up on your own mistakes, and sometimes you're projecting on others about mistakes they've made, and you're more concerned about their mistakes rather than your mistakes. And you're not forgiving either one. Forgive our hidden past, the secret shames, as we consistently forgive what others hide. So as an example, definitely with food, especially if your binge behavior is taking place outside of other people's sight, this is a secret shame. And how do you forgive yourself with that? And others are also have their secret shames too. So forgive them for that, even if if you haven't forgiven yourself for your own secret shames, it might be difficult to forgive others. But once you have forgiven yourself for it, you can understand when other people are doing it. In addiction, we do this all the time. It's like people are ashamed of being strung out. So in order to help them, you can't be strung out yourself. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt, wrote the screenplay, shot the movie, wrote the book. Lighten our load of secret debts as we relieve others of their need to repay. So this is the line where you get, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, because otherwise it's not even talking about money until about the third or fourth line in. Erase the inner marks our failures make, just as we scrub our hearts of others' faults. So this actually takes a greater degree of self-awareness. The inner marks that the shame of your failure makes on your heart. Erase that. It's another level of forgiveness. Absorb our frustrated hopes and dreams as we embrace those of others with emptiness. So that there can be shames about, I could have been a contender. Embracing others with emptiness can mean a couple of different things. In terms of looking at not being attached, being able to hear people's frustration and being able to say, there's a possibility, try again. Untangle the knots within so that we can mend our heart's simple ties to others. Compost our inner stolen fruit as we forgive others the spoils of their trespassing. Loose the cords of mistakes binding us as we release the strands we hold of others' guilt. So there are other traditions that go into forgiveness as deep as this. when I first found this material, it's not that I was going to throw away my KJV, but as my grandfather had suggested, that there is a deeper meaning to be found if you search for it. So, just to talk more about forgiveness. So, we've been talking about first in dealing with first drugs, then food. We basically covered the first major type of addiction, which is ingestive. That is, things you take into your body that change your consciousness and get you into an addictive, repetitive pattern. So that's why we took 4 weeks to do that. Now, part of looking at how all these addictive behaviors work from a civilian point of view so that you can actually make some changes is kind of make a distinction between the brain and the mind. So the brain and the mind, the brain is the physical organ. The mind is the process. That is, you wake up in the morning. Where were you before you woke up? Come on, simple question. You can't answer it? Make a guess. Make a running guess.
Dreaming?
Dreaming. Okay, so was that real?
When I was in the dream, it was, but
Uh-huh. Okay.
well, when I woke up, it wasn't.
Okay. So remember the piece in what we were doing with drugs about your nervous system and individual neurons? At the individual neuronal level, the individual nerve cell cannot tell the difference between a real event or an imagined event. So on that level, it's real. You captured it very well. While I was in the dream, it was real. And then I woke up. All right? So that's still a process. You were still experiencing that. So the way we construct reality. So this is a counseling psychology class, so I want to give you an alternate framework that's considered just as valid. Assagioli was a guy, right? So most of our psychology, so Roberto Assagioli, his main contribution was psychosynthesis. So what psychosynthesis is, so he's a contemporary of Freud and Jung, okay, who you've probably heard in terms of a psychological context, and that's all you ever hear about is Freud and Jung. So in counseling, we're using Freud's talking cure, right? Talking out your problems with a therapist, and then they resolve them or you can talk about it with somebody else, and it resolves somewhat, or you feel better, or whatever. Jung started talking about, okay, there's the collective unconscious, there's dreams, and there's archetypes, there's, dreams, which they have symbols, etc., etc. Assagioli is a contemporary of both Freud and Jung, but most people have never heard of him. So his thing was that while you're awake, it's like daylight. And when you're asleep, it's like the night. Now, in the nighttime, the stars are out, right? But in the daylight, they are also out. You just can't see them because of the sun, unless you get above the Earth's atmosphere in space, and then you can see the stars just fine. And then there's zero gravity. And so, by the way, if you haven't seen Gravity, the movie, check it out. It's a trip. Because it kind of illustrates what I'm talking about, what Asagioli is talking about. So he's saying, wherever you go in dreams, that is real. That's a separate reality that is continuous even while you're awake. So he's basically saying, yeah, you can navigate that, but you also have to be able to make the distinction to remain sane, because sometimes the dream world leaks into what we call waking reality, and if you don't have an agreement with other people, what I call consensus reality, like we all agree, just like I did with the LSD thing, don't think about pink elephants. No, don't think about pink elephants. Now you're all thinking about pink elephants, but nobody's seeing a pink elephant in the room, right? Consensus reality says, we ain't seeing the pink elephant in the room. But we are all having shared experience. Okay? Consensus reality. We agree that it is real, right? Asagioli says, healthy human psychology has to include what he referred to as the spiritual. That is, it's unseen, but everybody experiences it. And there's a consensus in various communities about what that is. My particular discipline within psychology is I'm a transpersonalist. Transpersonal, beyond the personal. The beyond exists. We can talk about it. We can map it. What does it look like? What does it mean in terms of, since my specialty is addiction, okay, part of the drug search, people are searching for something that they're not getting from society, from religion. They want meaning, they want a life purpose, so I'm going to do all these drugs until I get it. Or wow, that psychedelic, that experience was really amazing, you know, wish I could have that again. Wish I could just like stay there in Wonderland or whatever. Or, you know, there are other things like within that. So in an addiction context, again, there is that piece about, okay, so what does spirituality mean? What does religious experience mean? When is that addictive? When is it healthy? How do you have that conversation? Well, you have to have the conversation to be able to move towards some degree of health. I have to give it to the Pope. Said, yo, wait, you got a bishop that is spending $43 million on his house? You ain't bishop no more. They're going to kill that boy. No, but I hope not. All right, so back to slide. So the brain is the organ, and the mind, the process. Computer, software, if you want to use a 21st century trope or metaphor. The brain is the brain and mind are a pattern-making, pattern-seeking device. Seeks to make order out of chaos or make order where there is no order. So it looks familiar. Logic is a means of reasoning to an answer. The answer doesn't have to be true, just consistent with the logic. Now, I can illustrate this if you wish. How would you like it? How real do you want me to be? Really real? Okay. U.S. Constitution. Well, let's go back to the original Constitution. The first Constitution on Turtle Island. Iroquois Six Nations. Okay? Founded in 1100 AD. So before Columbus. Iroquois Six Nations. So Six Nations of the Iroquois, Seneca, Mohawk, Tuscarora, etc., etc. So you have clan mothers of, I believe it's 9 animal clans. 9 or 10 animal clans. I think there was a rock, there was also a potato clan. So wolf clan, eagle clan, snipe clan, clan mothers. So they selected chiefs. And so in order to be a chief, you either had to be a blood relative or of a clan mother or related by marriage. So the chiefs are basically representing these different clans, and then there's basically essentially 50 of them representing the nation. Now, we can't go to war. If there's a war, the two chiefs that are in conflict have to meet in open council and fail to reach an agreement after 3 times. At each time, they could be unchiefed. So we ain't going to war unless the clan mothers say that. So, in other words, you have women running the country. And we call that egalitarian, where women and men are basically equal, but in one sense, it's the women that basically hold the power. So yeah, we might go to war, but we're not going to war as frequently as if the men were running things, because we need to do that. So that logic of egalitarianism, everybody who is an adult, and adulthood starts when you pass your rites of passage. So every 13-year-old is an adult, able to vote. There are no restrictions on who can vote. None. Sexual diversity is part of that. So the two spirits, or men, same-sex couples, etc., are also part of the vote and have equal rights with everyone else. That is a logic system. Okay? That was here before 1492. So in 1776 to 1781, when we write our Constitution in America, the Constitution of the United States defines as citizens only rich white men. That's not the only humans that are around. Rich white men who own land. They're still working class and farmers. They are not necessarily citizens. No women are citizens. No wealthy blacks or natives are citizens. That's a logic system. So when they say all men are created equal in the United States Constitution, that is not the same as Iroquois Six Nations, which says all my relations, which doesn't mean just human beings. It means everything that we recognize as sentient, which includes trees and rocks and animals and all the other things. And the future generations, 7 generations from now, as well as the ancestors. Everybody. All men are created equal in the Constitution. That's a logic system, which does not mean all human beings present. All men are created equal, but some are equaler than others. Okay? Now that doesn't make sense, except within that logic system. Why would you set up a system like that when the system before said everybody's here got a voice? Why are you restricting the voice? Right? So that's an example of real world logic. It's logical, but it doesn't mean it's true. That's different. Right? Logic is a means of reasoning to an answer. Doesn't have to be true, just consistent with the logic. So for example, all legal drugs are safe for all uses whatsoever in all circumstances. This logic leads to farming, or snorting oxys, or smoking oxys, or overdosing on Vivarin, or alcohol. If one is good, 10 is even better. That's logic. Okay, remember, it's an answer. It doesn't have to be true. It could even be dangerous. So the point I'm making is addiction can be seen as a logical conclusion to do an unhealthy behavior. Brilliantly arrived at. So addiction is not a matter of intelligence. In fact, more intelligent you are, probably the more addiction prone you will be. Paradoxically.
Is that like that fake weed they sell in stores? Because it's legal, people think it's safe. And
The fake weed?
the fake weed, the
Yeah.
stuff, and
So depending on what that is, so for example, if you come like bath salts, right? The fake weed. Now, let's say for the sake of argument that it is actually from cannabis, which I've actually seen some research in some scenarios that suggest that is the case. All right? So what we've been able to do with our chemistry is like separate some of the 400 cannabinoids, right, that within the plant exist in a certain ratio. And we've started working on, certainly since the domestic marijuana industry began in the early 70s, begin focusing on genetically modifying the plants to produce more THC, right? So that people started out smoking what used to be only available from certain tropical areas or in hashish preparations. So just focusing on THC, and now medical is focusing on THC content and CBD, and I think there's another constituent called THZ. So the reason I went through all that is that bath salts, if they are cannabinoids, are some of the rarer cannabinoids that have been chemically separated out that are even more psychoactive than the THC, and so we start getting a way more toxic reaction because you would never get that in the plant in any form at the levels that are toxic, that are producing, things that are basically what we previously had only seen, like with phencyclidine, PCP. For PCP as a psychedelic, we didn't really get into that because nobody asked about it, and it's still available as a street drug, but basically what PCP and ketamine do, because they're chemical cousins, they're dissociative anesthetics, which they kill pain, that's the anesthetic part, but as a side effect, they're psychedelics. And the difference between, say, them and LSD, in LSD, I may be on acid and this water bottle may metaphor into a bullet or the Empire State Building, but I know it's the acid doing it, right? On PCP, it could turn into a monster, and it's real to me because the subject-object relationship has been erased with that particular drug, and I think it's real. Or my best friend turns into a monster and I can stab them to death because they're a monster, and then they could be lying dead on the floor bleeding, and it's the monster bleeding unless, it's now turned into my friend. What have I done if I do that? So we've seen those kind of things happen too. Or the super strength piece, which this is why in LAPD and other jurisdictions, if they knew somebody was dusted, they just shoot them because they can walk through plate glass windows. There's no pain response at all. You can beat them up with knife sticks, nothing. So the only thing to do would be to kill them, or, they go into rages, and all of a sudden they're, sitting there quietly in a pool of their own blood, bleeding out while the room is trashed, or whatever. So all that to say, right, so phencyclidine was a legal drug at one point, given to pregnant women. That was its use. This was when we thought pregnancy was a disease. And notice who the we is. Women doctors, because there weren't that many in the 50s and the 60s when we were giving pregnant women phencyclidine, it was to deal with a particular problem. Just like aspirin was to deal with a particular problem. Or people were addicted to opium. So we treat opium addiction with morphine. And then they're addicted to morphine. So then we create heroin for the morphine-addicted war heroes, heroin, to cure morphine addiction. Oh, methadone to cure heroin addiction, and so on. Okay? Certain logic. Logic don't have to be true, just has to be consistent. Right? Phencyclidine was, okay, pregnancy, rather labor hurts. So you need an anesthetic to cut the pain. So they give it to pregnant women in labor. Cuts the pain. It has a psychedelic side effect. So yeah, the pain is cut, but in her it's creating hallucinations and retrograde amnesia, which means baby comes out, what's this? Who is this? I don't remember being pregnant, as a side effect. No maternal bonding, as a side effect. Oops, let's stop doing that. Don't give it to pregnant women. We'll give it to horses and elephants, because they don't have a mind that we have to worry about. Not making that up. Large animal tranquilizer. Okay? Ketamine is now a club drug because it was basically the same thing. Yeah, they gave it as an anesthetic for surgery because it cuts pain, but it also has a psychedelic side effect. That's how it became a street drug or club drug. Okay, same logic. Oh, it's legal, it must be safe. I'm just in a K-hole. Yeah. All right, so brain mind. There's 4 brains, or this metaphor that we're using for 4 brains. So lizard brain. And this is how the 4 brains work, and I'm just going to introduce how lizard brain works with addiction. If it worked once, we'll do it again, every time we face the same or related situation. So for example, pain, loss, and fear. This is what worked to relieve my pain, loss, or fear. I'll do this particular activity. PLF, pain, loss, and fear causes stress. Sugar relieves stress. So when I feel stress, let me eat a quart of ice cream. Chocolate or rum raisin or whatever your favorite flavor is. This is part of the brain mechanism that sets up addictive binge eating behavior. Even though logically you know you shouldn't be eating a quart of ice cream, you definitely need more than a spoon, because actually it's a spoonful that will relieve the stress. That's the actual minimum dosage. A teaspoon of sugar. Mary Poppins notwithstanding. Anyway. So notice your characteristics around pain, loss, and fear. Do you tend to binge automatically without thinking when you experience those particular feelings? Some of you noticed in your food mood diaries, yeah, I just keep going until it's gone, whatever it is. Whole bag of peanuts, whole loaf of bread, whatever it is that is producing the actual symptom might have been relieved in the first bite or the first mouthful, but you continue going. And it's lizard brain that supports that, and I'll show you what lizard brain is. So part of what is supporting a healthy neurochemical balance is good nutrition. Pharmaceuticals, as an unadvertised side effect, drain you of vitamins and minerals, particularly of where you get vitamins and minerals in food, which is processed by the liver, which has its normal function changed. So remember, the definition of a drug is a substance that changes the normal function of living tissue. All pharmaceuticals, broken down by the liver, change the function of the liver, whose job it is to distribute vitamins and minerals. Change the function of the liver, you change that balance too. And you start having, as an unadvertised side effect, vitamin and mineral deficiencies. All right, so food itself, of course, can be a drug, particularly processed food with high sugar and salt content, in addition to the additives. So hydration. So for example, the recommended half your weight in ounces daily. So 200 pounds, 100 ounces, slightly less than a gallon. A goal to reach for. So the forebrains. This is your brain. Lizard brain, mammal brain, human brain, and angel brain. Different levels of cognition. So lizard brain, fear, pain, survival. Mammal brain, herd instinct, social nurturing. Human brain, thinking and cognition. Angel brain, executive functions, future planning, intuition, certain aspects that are associated with spirituality. Now, whether within this construct, the logic is evolutionary. That is, lizards came first, then mammals, then humans, then what we call angel brain. And this construct itself has basically come about in the last, say, 40 years. So, in turn. So, think of the velociraptors in Jurassic Park. Okay, lizard brain. The reptilian brain, the lower brain, cerebellum, spinal cord, pons and medulla. Lizard brain asks three things. Can I eat it? Will it eat me? Can I copulate with it? Basic urges, right? So, can I eat it? Approach pleasure. Will it eat me? Fear and flee pain. Can I copulate with it? Repeat pleasure. Basic addictive behavior. No future forethought at all. No consequences. Immediate need gratification. Okay? So this by itself explains most addiction. Okay? Except we ain't lizards. So, but we can start there. So reflex without thinking and addictive behavior. So you look at your repetitive patterns with food, drug, money, hence, how I spent my week, because advertisers and local merchants depend on you making impulse buys, even if you made a budget. So it's not just, should I eat before going shopping? Well, yes, you should. Don't shop while hungry. Why? Because hunger, part of lizard brain, is going to trigger more impulsive behavior. Now, this doesn't always work, but you want to stack the deck towards success. What are your repetitive patterns with food, drugs, and money? What do you fear? How do you act reflexively out of fear? What are your reflex responses around loss and pain? The mammal brain, which is the limbic system, which is the seat of the emotions. So, many people who are in addictive patterns use with their friends and loved ones or family systems. So, herd instinct, addictive using peer group, gambling, shopping, spending, debting, keeping up with the Joneses, outspending the Joneses. These are all emotional responses beyond immediate gratification that are involved with the limbic system. So, for example, mammal brain. So the brain 2 is wrapped around brain 1. The limbic system is wrapped around the old reptilian brain. Typical animals, cats, dogs, herd instinct, peer group. Who do I run with? That's why it's so powerful in terms of recovery, to change your associations. To not be the only one, unless you are actually a lone wolf, which may be, but it's not necessarily the way to be. So human brain, the neocortex. Again, growing around brain 1 and brain 2. Basically, the neocortex, the new cortex that's new relative to the rest of evolutionary psychology, gives us rational thought. With money, though, even though it's about counting and math and all that kind of stuff, many of our decisions are not necessarily rational around that. But the neocortex gives you rationalizations about, well, I'm not as bad as others. I can stop when I want to. It's not really a problem. I can control it, etc., etc. And of course, the more intelligent you are, the better rationalizations you can have. So, primates, especially human primates, neocortex. So, for example, and the reason I'm mentioning this, on the left you got chimpanzees. On the right you have bonobos, who share 98% of their gene structure with ours. There was a movement in psychology that says, okay, well, we're just fancy apes. And that aggression can be explained by, chimpanzees do conflict resolution with fighting. But when they discover bonobos don't do that. Bonobos actually resolve their conflicts using sex in all different combinations. Which is not to say that that's how you should do your conflict resolution either, but it definitely explains make-up sex, why that works. But that can also be an addictive behavior, too. Very much so. Angel brain, the prefrontal cortex. Basic activity of this brain region is considered to be orchestrating, organizing thoughts and actions in accordance with internal goals. The most typical neurologic term for functions carried out by prefrontal cortex is executive function. So the idea behind, for example, the money assignment is to develop executive function, planning. This starts developing at about age 15, continues at about age 22. The genome, I think, has wisely begun, for example, this development in women earlier than men, and faster, because that makes sense. Women get pregnant, you definitely want somebody that can project in the future, taking care of the kid. More than the knuckle draggers. So executive function relates to the ability to differentiate among conflicting thoughts, determine good and bad, better and best, same and different, future consequences of current activities, working towards a defined goal, prediction of outcomes, expectations based on actions, and basically connecting current actions with future outcomes, and the reverse, to stop behavior because it's going to have a bad outcome, and social control, the ability to suppress urges that, if not suppressed, could lead to socially unacceptable outcomes. So lots of authors have indicated a link between a person's personality and the functions of the prefrontal cortex. So this is not developed in teenagers. No impulse control, because they don't connect current actions with future consequences. There are certain drug states that enhance not doing that enhance that impulsivity, like meth. There are, if you have been drug exposed, if you have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, you might not have the fetal alcohol face, but you don't have the ability, the actual brain connections to connect the prefrontal cortex to future activities. So you basically go into negative cycles of activity where you don't connect consequences. Angel brain, higher prefrontal cortex developed at age 15 and 21, associated with higher human virtues and the ability to imagine future consequences as well as transpersonal and personal optimal outcomes. So there's a book, The Biology of Transcendence, which goes into that in more detail, especially the quote-unquote spiritual aspects dealt with by certain forms of psychology that offer as a reference. This will be up later. See you Tuesday.